Not every uniform earns respect, and not every judgment is right. When the truth finally surfaces, whose world will be turned upside down? Let us know in the comment section below, and don't forget to honor our veterans by subscribing and sharing where you're watching from. Kyle Sterling adjusted the cuff of his navy pool blazer, the faint shine of his watch catching the last of the sun as he gripped the leather steering wheel. His black Mercedes AMG GT purred along the two-lane country road, the machine's power barely hinted at beneath his smooth, controlled driving. It wasn't about showing off. It was about the feeling of movement, the satisfaction of owning something he'd earned, not inherited, not stolen, earned through decades of blood, sacrifice, and leadership. Kyle wasn't the kind of man to brag about the stars he once wore on his shoulder. The chest full of ribbons and medals now gathered dust in a simple glass case back home. Retirement hadn't been the prize people made it out to be. If anything, it was a quieter battlefield, one filled with paperwork, quiet judgments, and cold shoulders from strangers who saw a luxury car and not the soldier who lived through 2 wars to drive it. His sharp blue eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, where 2 headlights had been riding his tail a little too close for comfort. Kyle tapped the brakes lightly, a silent warning, before the inevitable happened. The siren's wail ripped through the calm, red and blue lights splashing across his mirrors. He eased the car onto the shoulder, his hands visible on the wheel before the patrol car even stopped behind him. Kyle wasn't naive. You didn't survive 30 years in the Army or achieve the rank of lieutenant general by assuming that life was always fair, especially not when the wrong cop pulled you over at the wrong time. The trooper stepped out, boots crunching the gravel, his hand already resting lightly on the butt of his pistol. Tall, broad-shouldered, sunglasses still on despite the fading sun. His walk was deliberate, almost theatrical. Officer Mitchell Barnes was already writing the story in his mind before he even saw Kyle's face. Luxury car. Out-of-towner. Probably a spoiled rich kid or worse, some washed-up suit trying to act important. Mitchell had made up his mind, and as he tapped his flashlight against his palm, his jaw tightened, like it always did when he smelled trouble. Kyle rolled the window down, his posture open, respectful. Even before Kyle could greet him, Barnes barked out the first line. "Yes, license and registration. Now, no. Good afternoon. No, sir. Just authority. Cold and heavy." Kyle moved slowly, narrating his movements like he'd trained his soldiers to do during checkpoint drills overseas. "Reaching for my wallet. Now, reaching for the registration in the glove box." His voice was calm, steady, unaffected. But Barnes didn't soften. If anything, he bristled. The registration hit the passenger seat with a soft slap as Kyle passed over his ID. Barnes snatched it, glanced once, then twice, his mouth tightening. "Kyle Sterling," Barnes read, almost skeptically. "Mind telling me what you're doing around here in a car like this?" Kyle leaned back against the headrest, his patience measured, infinite if it had to be. "Driving home," he said simply. "Is there a problem, officer?" Barnes' nostrils flared. He wasn't expecting calm. He wanted nervous. He wanted an apology for breathing the same air. "Step out of the vehicle," Barnes ordered, stepping back but keeping his right hand low near his belt. Kyle didn't argue. He knew the script Barnes was running, same one he'd seen kids with too much authority and too little wisdom use overseas. The kind who thought a badge or a rank made them gods instead of servants. He stepped out carefully, keeping his hands visible, the creases in his blazer still sharp from that morning. Barnes circled him like a buzzard sizing up a wounded animal. "You mind telling me where you got this car, Mr. Sterling?" Kyle's jaw ticked once, but he swallowed the heat rising in his chest. He remembered the words from his instructors, from old sergeants who'd seen worse things than this. "Don't escalate, de-escalate." "I bought it," Kyle said evenly. "Legally." Barnes snorted. "Eh? Must be nice." His voice dripped with disdain. "Mind if I take a look inside?" The way he said it made it clear it wasn't really a question. Kyle weighed his options. He could refuse, he had every legal right, but experience told him where that would lead. Delay, harassment, maybe worse. He nodded once. Barnes yanked open the door, tossing aside the neatness of Kyle's papers on the passenger seat without a second thought. He ran a rough hand along the dashboard, popped the glove compartment, pawed at the floorboards, searching for what? Drugs? Guns? A reason? Finding nothing, he slammed the door shut harder than necessary. "You military?" Barnes asked suddenly, as if accusing him. Kyle simply nodded. Burns scoffed. "Bet you got some sob story, too. PTSD, medals, whatever." Kyle kept his mouth closed. Barnes stepped closer, the brim of his hat nearly brushing Kyle's forehead. "People like you think you're above the law," he muttered. "Think you can flash some badge, play hero." The absurdity almost made Kyle laugh. Almost. Instead, he let the silence stretch between them, heavy and uncomfortable. A second cruiser pulled up, its headlights slicing into the growing dark. Out stepped another officer, younger, leaner, his movements careful and unsure. Officer Jason Kim approached cautiously, noting the situation. His gaze flicked from Barnes' aggressive posture to Kyle's composed stance. Barnes jerked his thumb. "Got a possible here? Might be some stolen vehicle situation? Or worse." Kim frowned, scanning Kyle, taking in the neatly trimmed hair, the pressed clothes, the unmistakable bearing that clung to him like a second skin. "Sir, do you have any military ID on you?" Kim asked, softer, almost apologetic. Kyle nodded, reached slowly into his blazer's inner pocket and pulled out the worn leather case. He flipped it open, revealing the ID and the stars. 3 silver stars gleamed back at Officer Kim under the harsh lights. The younger cop froze. Even Barnes hesitated, the arrogance faltering for a half-second as his eyes registered the insignia. Lieutenant General, retired, United States Army. Barnes opened his mouth, but no words came out immediately. Coincided Kyle tilted his head slightly, the faintest edge of authority creeping into his voice now. "Is there a problem, Officer Burns?" The question hung in the air like the moment before a storm. Barnes shifted his weight, eyes darting to Kim as if searching for a lifeline, but none came. Kim stood stiffly at the edge of the scene, his face carefully blank, but the muscles in his jaw betrayed his discomfort. A gust of late summer wind stirred the dust around their feet, but none of them moved. Kyle waited. He wasn't angry. He wasn't flustered. He had faced down hostile insurgents in remote corners of the world, had negotiated ceasefires while artillery boomed over the horizon. What was one small-town cop's bruised ego to him? Still, he could feel the old ache pulsing low in his chest, a wound that wasn't stitched by any surgeon or salved by any metal. Finally, Barnes cleared his throat. His voice was rough, his authority buckling under the weight of his mistake. You should have said who you were." Kyle allowed a slow breath to escape through his nose. He didn't smile. He didn't smirk. He simply spoke, low and firm, the way he had when addressing fresh lieutenants who needed to be reminded who they were supposed to be. "I didn't realize driving while minding my own business required credentials." Kim blinked, glancing at Barnes, then quickly back down to his boots. The tension was thick, but Barnes seemed incapable of backing down completely. He latched onto a thread of defensiveness, his voice rising just enough to sound foolish. "A lot of stolen vehicles these days," Barnes muttered, shrugging half-heartedly. "Better safe than sorry." Kyle took a half-step forward, and though he didn't raise his voice, it seemed to fill the entire space between them. "And what exactly made you think I stole my own car, officer?" Barnes opened his mouth, but no answer came. None that would sound right, none that would save him from the pit he dug himself into. His hand dropped away from his belt, suddenly looking like dead weight. But behind them, Kim's radio crackled softly, a dispatch call about a minor fender bender 2 blocks away. He glanced at Kyle, then at Barnes, hesitation written all over his face. As to Kyle, could see it, the crossroads in front of the younger officer. Speak up or stay silent and be part of the rot. Kyle knew the choice all too well. It was the same in battle, in command, in life. Some moments defined you, others unmade you. Barnes, sensing the shift, squared his shoulders in a last show of force. "You're free to go," he said, voice clipped, dismissive. Kyle didn't move. Not yet. He looked at Kim instead, holding the younger man's gaze. "You have a good head on your shoulders," Kyle said, tone even, almost fatherly. "Don't let it get clouded." Kim nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but enough. Enough to tell Kyle he heard him. Kyle turned, moving back to his car with the same deliberate control he'd used under fire. He slid behind the wheel, closed the door gently, and waited until the two officers were moving before starting the engine. The rumble of the AMG was smooth, confident, like him. He pulled back onto the road, the wheels kissing the asphalt, the town unfolding ahead like a map he didn't want to read. But the weight in his chest stayed. It wasn't just about Barnes. It was about what Barnes represented, about how easy it was to fall into assumptions, to strip away dignity with a glance, a tone, a sneer, about how quickly honor could be dismissed because of the car you drove or the clothes you wore or the way you didn't flinch when someone barked orders. Kyle didn't drive straight home. Instead, he found himself heading toward a small diner he knew on the edge of town, a place where the coffee was terrible and the company was better. He needed to breathe. He needed to sit and remember that the world, for all its bruises, still held good in it. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, and a few heads turned. Not many. Small towns thrived on familiar faces, and Kyle was a face people knew even if they didn't always know the story behind it. He slid into a booth near the window, the cracked vinyl seat groaning under him. The waitress, Maggie, her name tag read, approached with a tired smile and a steaming pot of coffee. "Evening, hung? Long day?" Kyle just nodded. Maggie poured the coffee, her hand steady despite the slight tremor of arthritis that twisted her fingers. As she walked away, Kyle stared into the black surface of the coffee, watching the steam curl and dance. For a moment he was somewhere else, the smell of diesel fuel and dust, the heavy weight of body armor cutting into his shoulders, the sound of distant gunfire, sharp and real. He blinked once, shook it off, another ghost to file away. Across the diner, an old man in a flannel shirt nodded at him. Kyle recognized him. Mr. Patterson, a Navy vet who still wore his faded ball cap like a badge of honor. Kyle nodded back, and for a moment that small gesture patched something invisible inside him. The door jingled again, and two young guys in baseball caps walked in, laughing too loud. They shoved each other toward the counter, careless, unaware. Kyle watched them for a moment, feeling the old ache rise again. He thought about how quickly things shifted, how thin the line was between respect and ridicule, between dignity and suspicion. He remembered a young corporal he once knew in Fallujah. Kid had been built like a linebacker, all muscle and good intentions. Got stopped on base once, wrong place, wrong time, wrong skin color. Took 3 months for anyone to admit the mistake. By then the kid's spirit had a hairline crack that never quite healed. Kyle rubbed a hand across his jaw, feeling the scrape of stubble. Maggie came back with a slice of pie without asking, just plunked it down with a wink. He smiled, genuine this time, and took a bite. Tart cherries, too much sugar, too little care. And yet somehow it was exactly what he needed. Out the window the world continued spinning, indifferent and beautiful and broken all at once. He would have driven home after that, would have let it go. But fate had other plans. Kyle's phone buzzed against the tabletop, rattling the spoon beside his mug. He frowned and picked it up. It was Marcus, his neighbor's son, a law student with more energy than sense most days. "Hey, Mr. Sterling," Marcus said, voice tense. "You might want to check your email." Something's blowing up. It's about you." Todd felt the first real prickle of unease. "What kind of something?" There was a pause. Then Marcus said, "Somebody filmed that cop pulling you over." The words hit harder than he expected. "And they posted it," Marcus added. "It's already getting attention." Kyle closed his eyes for a second. The simple drive home, the mistake, the indignity, now public. He opened his browser, fingers steady even as his heart ticked faster. There it was, a shaky cell phone video, headline blazing. "Local hero harassed by police. Watch the shocking encounter." Kyle watched the footage unfold in miniature on the screen, watched Barnes swagger, watched himself stand calm, dignified, watched the moment when the badge of a 3-star general glinted under the flashing lights. In the comments, strangers were already choosing sides. Anger, outrage, solidarity, and somewhere, he knew, Barnes was realizing the same thing Kyle had known all along. The truth has a way of surfacing, and once it does, there's no shoving it back down. Kyle stared at the screen a moment longer before setting the phone face down on the table. The pie sat untouched now, the bitter taste of what was coming already rising in the back of his throat. A few heads in the diner turned his way, subtle glances over coffee cups and worn menus, like they had felt the shift in the air too. The world didn't wait anymore. It didn't pause to ask questions or weigh context. It judged in real time, measured in likes, comments, and reposts. Kyle had spent a lifetime making careful moves, thinking 3 steps ahead, but here, now, he was already behind the curve. Maggie passed by his booth and hesitated, her brows pinched together, her mouth drawing into a tight line. She opened her mouth to say something, then thought better of it, giving him a quick squeeze on the shoulder instead before shuffling back behind the counter. Kyle didn't blame her. Words wouldn't change anything now. He pulled a few bills from his wallet, tucking them neatly under the coffee cup, and walked out into the fading light. The drive home felt shorter somehow, the roads blurring past, his mind too busy to notice the familiar landmarks. His hands remained steady on the wheel, a small, stubborn act of defiance against the whirlwind he could feel gaining speed behind him. The neighborhood was quiet as he pulled into his driveway, the houses casting long shadows across trimmed lawns and tidy porches. Kyle cut the engine, letting the silence settle before stepping out. He caught movement from across the street. Mrs. Davison, watering her begonias, paused when she saw him. Her wave was hesitant, almost apologetic. Kyle returned it anyway, a small, tired motion. Inside, the house welcomed him with the familiar scent of leather and old wood, the polished gleam of awards and photographs lining the hallway. His boots clicked softly against the hardwood floor as he moved toward his office, a room that once buzzed with strategy meetings and operational reports, now reduced to a place for reading and reflection. He sank into the worn leather chair behind his desk, pulling the laptop toward him. The notifications were relentless. His name was everywhere, news outlets, social media feeds, message boards. Some called him a hero wronged, others predictably twisted the story, casting doubt on the footage, questioning the context. And when he was trying to respond, he said, Kyle knew better than to dive into the comments, but part of him couldn't help it. He scrolled, each word a small cut. Maybe he mouthed off before the camera started rolling. Cops have a hard job. Mistakes happen. Another snowflake veteran wanting attention. And beneath those, voices that steadied him like anchors thrown into a storm. This man served his country with honor. This is how we treat our heroes? Respect should be earned, not assumed. He earned it. My father was Army. He deserved better, too. Kyle leaned back, closing his eyes. He hadn't asked for this spotlight, hadn't sought it, but there it was, burning hot and wide, impossible to step out of now. The doorbell rang. For a moment, Kyle considered ignoring it. But something tugged at him. A soldier's instinct honed through years of understanding that hesitation could be costly. He rose, crossed the floor, and opened the door. Marcus stood there, looking like he'd run the whole way, laptop bag slung over his shoulder, a wild gleam in his eyes. "Mr. Sterling," he panted, holding up his phone. "It's everywhere. CNN just picked it up. They're talking about setting up interviews. Civil rights attorneys are offering to represent you. This thing's not dying down." Kyle rested a hand against the doorframe, feeling the weight of it all. "I don't want a circus," he said quietly. "I know," Marcus said, stepping inside when Kyle nodded him through. "But you deserve to tell your side. People are listening, really listening." Kyle's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile if there had been any humor left in the situation. "I spent decades training young men to act without emotion under fire," he said. "Now I'm supposed to let the court of public opinion decide my worth?" Marcus dropped his bag by the couch, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. "It's not about proving your worth," he said. "It's about showing what's broken, and maybe, just maybe, fixing it." Kyle studied the young man for a long moment. Marcus was earnest, unpolished, all sharp edges and restless energy. It reminded Kyle of the green recruits he'd once molded into warriors. The thought stung. The world still needed building, and here he was, sitting out the fight. He pushed off the doorframe, walking back toward the office. Marcus followed, pulling his laptop free and firing it up without being asked. "Look," Marcus said, tapping through a few tabs. "There's a press conference tomorrow. The police department's trying to get ahead of it. They're spinning it already. Miscommunication, standard procedure, all the usual garbage." Kyle said nothing. "They're going to throw Officer Barnes under the bus," Marcus continued, voice low, "but they're not going to admit fault. They'll bury it under paperwork and ongoing investigations until everyone forgets." Kyle looked out the window, watching the street lamps flicker to life one by one. "Let 'em," he said finally. Marcus snapped his head toward him. "You can't just—" "I didn't come back from war to fight every battle," Kyle said, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 silent concessions, 1,000 silent victories no one ever saw. "Sometimes you win by standing still." Marcus opened his mouth to argue, then shut it again. He folded his arms, frustration etched into every line of his body. "You're bigger than this town," he muttered. "You're bigger than them." Kyle smiled, faint but genuine. "Doesn't feel that way." The phone rang again, this time the landline. Kyle moved to answer it, expecting a reporter, or maybe one of the old generals he still traded Christmas cards with. Instead, it was Chief Alan Rodriguez. "Kyle," the chief said, his voice heavy, "we need to talk." Kyle said nothing, waiting. "I can come by," Rodriguez offered, the words strained as if he were chewing them out one by one. "Tomorrow morning," Kyle said. "Nah." Rodriguez agreed quickly, relief evident. Now hung up without another word. Marcus was watching him, arms still crossed, but now the frustration was tinged with curiosity. "What are you going to say to him?" Kyle turned back toward the window, his reflection faint and ghost-like in the glass. "Nothing he wants to hear," he said. Outside, the wind picked up, bending the trees slightly, their leaves shivering against the darkening sky. Inside, Kyle Sterling prepared for another kind of war. One fought not with bullets, but with words. Not for medals, but for dignity. This time, he wasn't marching into enemy territory. This time, the battleground was right here, on the very streets he called home. And this time, he wasn't planning on retreating. Morning came heavy with tension, the kind that crept under the skin and settled in the joints. Kyle dressed methodically, buttoning his crisp white shirt with deliberate slowness, every movement a small act of preparation. His reflection in the bathroom mirror stared back at him. Older, yes, the lines around his eyes deeper. But there was something else, too, a steadiness that time and adversity hadn't managed to wash away. At exactly 8:58, a cruiser rolled up outside. Kyle saw it through the front window without moving. He waited until the sharp knock rattled the door before opening it. Chief Alan Rodriguez stood on the porch, hat in hand, his face a careful mask of concern and authority. The chief was shorter than Kyle remembered, or maybe Kyle had simply grown tired of giving men like him the benefit of the doubt. "This morning, Kyle," Rodriguez said, his voice trying for warmth but landing closer to hollow. Kyle stepped aside without a word, letting him in. Rodriguez hesitated before crossing the threshold like the house itself might judge him, then made his way into the living room. He perched on the edge of the couch, the hat spinning nervously in his hands. Kyle remained standing. "I appreciate you making time," Rodriguez said after a beat. Kyle said nothing. The chief cleared his throat, adjusted the hat again. "I wanted to say first, what happened yesterday, it doesn't reflect the values of our department." Kyle arched an eyebrow, the smallest of movements, but Rodriguez caught it. "I know how it looks," Rodriguez hurried on. "And honestly, Barnes, well, he's had complaints before. Nothing formal stuck, but you know how it is. Word gets around." Kyle crossed his arms over his chest. "So you knew?" he said, voice low, measured. Rodriguez hesitated just a fraction too long. "Knew he was rough around the edges," he said finally. "But nothing we could act on officially." Kyle let the silence stretch, heavy and unblinking. Rodriguez shifted, the weight of it crawling over his skin. "We're launching an internal review," he said, grasping for the next branch, "and Barnes will be placed on administrative leave, effective immediately." Kyle nodded slowly, a movement so slight it could have been mistaken for the settling of dust. "And what about public accountability?" Kyle asked, the words cutting through the room like a blade. Rodriguez swallowed. "We're drafting a statement, offering an apology." Absorbed. Kyle's mouth twisted into a grim smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That sorts?" Rodriguez leaned forward, placing his hat on his knees. Look," he said, voice softening into something that almost sounded genuine. "I get it. I do. But the department's under a microscope right now. We have to be careful how we phrase things. Lawyers are involved." Kyle stepped closer, forcing Rodriguez to crane his neck to meet his gaze. "You're more worried about liability than you are about justice," Kyle said. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. Rodriguez opened his mouth, then closed it again, the admission plain in his silence. Kyle straightened, pulling in a slow breath that filled his chest with something colder than anger. "You want my silence?" Kyle said. "You want me to accept your sort of apology, pat you on the back, and let you sweep this into a folder marked handled?" Rodriguez didn't deny it. Kyle nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "Let me be clear," he said, voice hardening. "I fought battles half a world away so that men like you could sit behind desks and make decisions without fear. I didn't do it so you could dishonor the uniform you wear now." Rodriguez flinched, a small, involuntary movement. Kyle turned away, walking to the mantel where the shadow box of his service medals hung. His fingers hovered over it, not quite touching the glass. "This isn't about Warrens," Kyle said. "Not just him. It's about every moment someone in a position of trust chose to look the other way because it was easier, because it was safer. He faced Rodriguez again. "And I'm not going to be part of that." Rodriguez stood abruptly, smoothing down the front of his jacket. "I understand," he said stiffly. "If you decide to speak out publicly, we'll respect that right." Kyle studied him for a long, slow moment. "You don't have a choice," he said. The chief nodded once, tight and jerky, and left without another word. Kyle watched the cruiser pull away, its lights flashing briefly as it turned the corner and disappeared. He stood there for a while, the house settling back into silence around him. Then he picked up the phone. It was time to make a few calls of his own. By noon, Kyle was sitting in the small, cluttered office of a local advocacy group, Veterans for Justice. The woman behind the desk, Claire Jennings, had the lean, weathered look of someone who had fought her own battles, though hers had likely been fought in courtrooms rather than deserts. She offered him a strong cup of coffee and a handshake that meant business. "I've seen the video," she said without preamble. "We can amplify this, get national coverage, rally veterans groups, force a real response." Kyle shook his head once. "I'm not looking for fame," he said. Claire leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "It's not about fame," she said. "It's about forcing a system that would rather forget to remember." Kyle considered her for a moment. "Then what's the first step?" he asked. Claire smiled, a flash of teeth. "We tell your story," she said. "On your terms. No spin. No watering it down." Kyle nodded slowly, feeling the first real spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Asking, he spent the next hour giving a measured interview, the camera barely noticeable as it captured his calm recounting of events. No dramatics, no anger, just truth laid bare, clean and unflinching. When it was over, Claire promised the video would be live within the day. Kyle stepped out into the sunlight, blinking against the brightness. The world looked the same, but he knew better. Change rarely announced itself with fanfare. It started with small shifts, silent and steady, like the roots of a tree cracking concrete beneath the surface. His phone buzzed again. "Marcus." "Mr. Sterling," the young man said, breathless with excitement. "You're trending. Everywhere. Hashtags. Interviews. People are rallying behind you." Kyle smiled, a real one this time. Good. It wasn't about him. It was about something bigger, something older than one man, one badge, one mistake. It was about reminding people that respect was not a favor. It was a right, earned by sacrifice, by service, by dignity. And no man, no matter the badge on his chest, had the right to strip that away. Kyle slipped his phone into his pocket and started walking. There was still a long road ahead. But he wasn't walking it alone anymore. Kyle adjusted the cuff of his blazer as he stepped into the community center's main hall, the buzz of conversation brushing over him like static electricity. The room was packed, rows of folding chairs set hastily in every direction, a podium at the front under a worn American flag, camera crews huddled in the corners like vultures waiting for movement. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't asked for the dozens of veterans who showed up in uniform pieces they hadn't worn in years, jackets too tight, hats slightly faded but heads held high. He hadn't asked for the families, the young students, the mothers and fathers clutching homemade signs that read things like, "Honor all who serve," and "Accountability now." But here they were. Kyle moved through the crowd slowly, nodding when someone reached out to shake his hand, offering quiet thanks when strangers clapped him on the shoulder. His path was deliberate but unhurried, like he had all the time in the world and nothing left to fear. At the front, Claire Jennings was waiting, her clipboard tucked under her arm, her phone pressed against her ear as she waved him over with the other hand. She finished her call as he approached, giving him a quick, fierce smile. "You ready for this?" she asked, her voice low enough that only he could hear. Kyle glanced out over the crowd, noting the different faces, the weathered, the young, the skeptical, the proud. "No," he said honestly, "but I'm going anyway." Claire grinned wider, stepping aside to clear his path to the podium. The murmuring quieted as Kyle took his place behind the microphone. It wasn't the silence of indifference. It was the silence of breath held, of 1,000 stories pressing against the inside of 1,000 chests, waiting to be spoken aloud. Kyle adjusted the mic slightly, the movement somehow more grounding than any prayer could have been. He didn't have a speech. He didn't need one. "I spent 32 years in uniform," Kyle said, his voice carrying easily through the hall without shouting. "Not for the paycheck, not for the medals, but because I believed in something bigger than myself." The silence shifted, deepened. "I believed in service," he continued. "I believed in sacrifice. I believed that when we put on that flag, stitched it to our sleeve or wore it over our heart, we owed something, not just to our country, but to each other." Someone near the front nodded, a slow, solemn motion. "And I still believe that," Kyle said, "even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." He let the words hang for a moment before continuing. Last week I was pulled over while driving home. I wasn't pulled over because I broke the law. I wasn't pulled over because of suspicion tied to anything I did. I was pulled over because of assumptions. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I was presumed guilty before I was even spoken to, Kyle said. And when it was discovered who I was, what I had done, only then was I deemed worthy of courtesy. He let his gaze sweep across the audience, catching eyes where he could. But respect shouldn't be conditional. It shouldn't depend on what medals you wear, what car you drive, or what uniform you use to put on every morning. Claire stood by the side, arms folded tightly across her chest, her face fierce. Kyle continued, voice steady. The truth is, injustice doesn't always wear a black mask or carry a club. Sometimes it wears a badge. Sometimes it carries a clipboard. Sometimes it sits behind a desk and files the wrong reports. A low hum of agreement moved through the crowd, growing. But it's not just about punishment, Kyle said. It's about expectation, about demanding better from the systems that are supposed to protect us, not humiliate us. He leaned closer to the microphone. And demanding better starts with refusing to stay silent? Applause broke out then, sharp and honest, and Kyle waited, allowing it to swell and fade before he spoke again. This isn't just my story, he said. This is every veteran who came home and found themselves fighting a different kind of war. Every mother afraid for her son's safety on the way to school. Every father who teaches his daughter how to survive a traffic stop before he teaches her how to drive. He straightened, the medals pinned to his memory heavier than the ones tucked away in boxes. I'm standing here today not because I want revenge, not because I want to tear anyone down, but because I believe we can build something better. We have to. The applause came again, longer this time, echoing off the walls. Kyle stepped back slightly from the podium, signaling he was finished. As he turned, Marcus rushed up, shoving his phone toward him. Mr. Sterling, he said, breathless. CNN just aired the interview. MSNBC's asking for a live feed. And, he hesitated, eyes wide, the governor just tweeted about you. Kyle raised an eyebrow. Good or bad? Marcus grinned. Very good. Claire reached for Kyle's arm, squeezing it tightly. He did it, she whispered. Kyle shook his head once. We did it, he corrected. The mayor, a wiry woman named Evelyn Hughes, climbed onto the stage behind him. She adjusted the microphone, clearing her throat awkwardly. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, her voice amplifying awkwardly into the speaker system before she corrected it, I want to first offer an apology to Mr. Sterling, to every veteran who has ever felt overlooked, and to every citizen who expects and deserves better from their public servants. Kyle paused halfway down the steps, turning back slightly as Hughes continued. Effective immediately, the mayor said, reading carefully from a folded statement. An independent review board will be established to investigate complaints of misconduct. Officer Mitchell Barnes has been suspended pending investigation, and mandatory retraining for the department will be implemented by next quarter. A low, stunned murmur filled the room. Kyle caught Claire's wide-eyed expression. It wasn't just a PR move. This was action. Real action. Hughes went on, but Kyle let the words fade into the background. They weren't for him anymore. They were for the movement that had taken root, the wave that was already beginning to crest. As he exited the hall into the bright morning sun, he found himself surrounded again, not by reporters or cameras this time, but by people. Fathers clapping him on the shoulder, mothers wiping their eyes, veterans offering solemn salutes. Kyle returned each gesture with quiet grace, understanding now more than ever that leadership didn't end when you took off the uniform. Sometimes the hardest fights came after the battles were over, and sometimes the quietest stands echoed the loudest. Marcus jogged to catch up with him as they moved toward the parking lot. "Where to now?" the young man asked, still vibrating with adrenaline. Curl smiled faintly, sliding his sunglasses on as he looked toward the long stretch of road ahead. "Oh," he said, "then wherever the next call comes from." Because justice wasn't a destination, it was a mission, one he intended to see through, one step, one voice, one impossible victory at a time. The front porch creaked softly under Kyle's boots as he settled into the old rocking chair, a cup of black coffee balanced carefully between his hands. The morning sun spilled across the neatly cut lawn, the air fresh with the promise of new beginnings. Across the street, Mrs. Davison waved from her garden, a wide, easy smile lighting her face. Kyle lifted his cup slightly in return. It had been 2 weeks since the town meeting, but the ripples were still spreading. The new Civilian Review Board had been sworn in. Officer Barnes was formally removed from duty, pending a full inquiry. Mandatory retraining programs were rolling out department-wide. But more than that, something intangible had shifted. Kyle saw it in the way Officer Jason Kim stopped by last Sunday, bringing a fresh apple pie his wife had baked, awkwardly apologizing again for what had happened, even though Kyle had long since forgiven him. He saw it when teenagers in the neighborhood, kids he barely knew, shouted, "Thank you for your service," from their bicycles as they pedaled past. Respect, real respect, had begun to root itself again. Not the kind demanded by rank or ceremony, but the kind earned by truth and resilience. Kyle sipped the coffee slowly, the bitterness grounding him in the moment. The screen door banged open behind him and Marcus stepped out, juggling a laptop and a sheaf of papers. "You're going viral again," Marcus said, laughing breathlessly. "The governor mentioned you in his press conference this morning. They're talking about naming a day after you. Sterling Day. Can you believe it?" Kyle chuckled low in his throat, the sound rough but warm. "Calm day, you're invisible," he said, "and the next, they want to put your name on a calendar." Marcus plopped down onto the step below the porch, flipping open his laptop. "It's not just the governor," he said, excitement coloring his voice. "Veterans groups across the state are organizing town halls, citizens' rights workshops, scholarships in your name." Kyle raised an eyebrow. "Scholarships?" Marcus grinned. "For kids who want to go into public service, law enforcement, legal defense, public policy. Your name's going to be attached to a whole new generation of people trying to make it better." The words landed heavier than Kyle expected. For a moment, he had no words. He thought about the countless men and women he had led into battle, about the quiet hopes they carried with them into foreign sands and dense jungles. Hopes that maybe, just maybe, their sacrifices would shape a better future. It was happening now, in ways he had never dared to imagine. He set the coffee cup down carefully and leaned forward. "None of this happens without you, Marcus," he said. "You didn't let it die in the dark." Marcus flushed slightly, looking down at his shoes. I just didn't want to see them get away with it." Kyle reached out, clapping a firm hand on his shoulder. "You did more than that. You reminded me that the fight's not over when the guns fall silent." A beat passed, comfortable and heavy with understanding. From down the street, a slow parade of cars began to roll into view, decorated in red, white, and blue banners. A few neighbors leaned out of their doorways, curious. Marcus stood quickly, shading his eyes. "What's this?" he asked. Kyle rose, too, the stiffness in his knees a small price for the view unfolding. At the head of the procession was a squad car, lights flashing, but this time no siren, no threat. Behind it, veterans marched in loose formation, their old uniforms pulled tight over broad chests and proud shoulders. Families followed, holding homemade signs. Local businesses waved banners that said, "Thank you, Kyle Sterling," and "Real heroes deserve real respect." Claire Jennings waved from the front of the line, her clipboard nowhere in sight for once. She was laughing, chatting with Mr. Patterson and a few other veterans, a cluster of resilience and pride moving as one. Kyle watched, a strange lump forming in his throat, too big to swallow down. They were coming for him. Not with torches, not with accusations, but with gratitude. Marcus clapped him on the back. "I think this might be your cue," he said. Kyle shook his head, smiling despite himself. "No speeches," he warned. "Not today," Marcus agreed. They walked down the porch steps together, Kyle adjusting his shoulders unconsciously, falling into the easy, quiet bearing that had once commanded battalions. As the crowd drew closer, cheers rose into the soft morning air, swelling like a tide. Kyle found himself surrounded. Handshakes, claps on the back, hugs from people he barely knew. A little boy in a Cub Scout uniform handed him a small American flag, his eyes wide with awe. Kyle knelt carefully, accepting the flag with both hands. "Thank you, sir," the boy whispered. "No," Kyle said, his voice rough, steady. "Thank you." He rose, planting the small flag carefully into the lawn beside the mailbox, the fabric fluttering in the breeze. The mayor appeared next, striding toward him with an official-looking folder in her hands. "Kyle Sterling," she announced, her voice ringing out over the gathering. "On behalf of the town council, the citizens of our community, and grateful hearts across this state, we hereby proclaim this day, Sterling Day, in honor of your lifetime of service and your courage in standing for justice when it mattered most." The crowd erupted into applause, the sound rattling windows, making birds lift into the sky. Kyle accepted the proclamation with quiet grace, holding it firmly but not flaunting it. He didn't need the paper. He didn't need the title. He had already won the fight that mattered. As the applause settled into quiet conversations, handshakes, and shared laughter, Kyle drifted back toward his porch, Marcus at his side. They sat in the rocking chairs, the world buzzing contentedly around them. "You ever think it would turn out like this?" Marcus asked after a while, his voice soft. Kyle thought for a moment. "Didn't think about endings," he said. "Only about what needed doing next." Marcus nodded, absorbing it. Kyle leaned back, letting the sunlight soak into his skin, the coffee cooling forgotten on the table beside him. Across the town, across the county, the story was still traveling, still growing. But here, for now, there was peace. Not the fragile kind that shatters under the next wrong word. The real kind, built with truth, forged by standing firm. Kyle closed his eyes briefly, breathing it in. But ever came tomorrow. More calls, more interviews, more battles. He would be ready. But today was for something simpler. The take was for victory, for dignity, for a future that would remember. The rocking chair creaked slowly under him, a familiar comforting rhythm, as Kyle Sterling, soldier, fighter, man of quiet strength, finally allowed himself to rest. And as the breeze picked up and carried the sound of laughter and music through the town, he smiled. Not because he had won something for himself, not because he had won it for all of them, for everyone who ever deserved to be seen, truly seen, and never doubted again. For every silent battle fought and finally brought into the light,